I brought these for you, Margaret.
The room went silent the second woman walked in holding flowers. Everyone at that table knew something was wrong. What they didn't know was that the house they were sitting in, the chairs they were sitting on, even the plates in front of them, belonged to the woman they had just tried to replace. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Margaret Ashworth had spent 11 years married to a man who was slowly becoming a stranger. She had spent 5 of those years running a company her grandfather built, one most of his family had no idea she actually controlled. She never mentioned it. She never needed to. People who ask a lot of questions rarely bother finding real answers. Margaret was never the woman who raised her voice. She wasn't the woman who posted her achievements online or corrected people who underestimated her. She let them underestimate her. It was easier that way and safer. Her husband, Thomas Ashworth, had loved that about her once. In the early years, he told his friends she was the calmest person he'd ever met, that nothing rattled her, that she made him feel steady. Somewhere along the way, steady started to feel like boring. Calm started to feel like cold. His mother, Diane, had opinions about that shift, and she was never quiet about them. Diane believed a successful man needed a woman who made him feel like a king, not a woman who ran board meetings before breakfast. She said it in soft voices disguised as concern. "You work so much. You should smile more. Have you thought about what Thomas needs?" Margaret always answered the same way. Calmly, briefly, without giving Diane the reaction she was fishing for. It made Diane furious in a way arguments never could, because you cannot win a fight against someone who refuses to fight back. Thomas met Lauren at a work conference. She was 26, warm, easy to talk to, impressed by everything he said. He told her his marriage was already over in every way that mattered. He told her Margaret didn't understand him. He told her divorce was only a matter of time. None of it was true, but Lauren had no reason to doubt him. When Diane found out about Lauren, she didn't panic. She celebrated. Finally, in her mind, a woman who would put her son first. Within a few months, Diane was introducing Lauren to relatives not as a girlfriend, but as family. A cousin asked the obvious question once, "What about Margaret?" Diane waved it off. "That situation is temporary." Margaret noticed the late nights and the sudden trips. She wasn't naive. She simply wasn't interested in chasing proof of something that would eventually reveal itself on its own. What Thomas never fully understood was how much had quietly shifted underneath their marriage years before Lauren ever entered the picture. When Margaret's grandfather passed, he left the company and the property to her directly, structured through a private family trust her attorney had drawn up long before the wedding. It wasn't a secret exactly. It was simply never advertised. Margaret had grown up watching money turn people strange, watching cousins circle her grandfather at holidays hoping to be remembered kindly in a will. She decided early that she would rather be underestimated than watched that way herself. Thomas knew there was family money somewhere in the picture. He assumed, the way people often assume when it's convenient, that whatever existed belonged to both of them simply because they shared a bed and a last name. Nobody had ever corrected that assumption, mostly because nobody had ever asked the actual question out loud. Diane got tired of waiting, so she staged a birthday dinner that wasn't really a birthday dinner. Family from both sides, a few close friends, Thomas and Lauren, walking in halfway through the meal, carrying flowers she clearly didn't want to be holding. The room froze. Diane stood, smiling, and said, "Come sit beside Thomas." Every head turned toward Margaret. She set her napkin down slowly, not angry, not embarrassed, just watching. "Should someone explain?" she asked, her voice even. That calm made the moment worse for everyone else in the room. not better. Diane, mistaking composure for surrender, kept going. She said Thomas deserved a woman who put him first. She said some women know when it's time to step aside. A few relatives looked at their plates. Nobody wanted to be part of what was happening, but nobody left either. Margaret let her finish. Then she looked at Lauren and asked one question. How long have you known my husband? Lauren swallowed and said 8 months. And what exactly has he told you about our marriage? Margaret asked next. Thomas's face lost color before Lauren said a single word. Lauren answered honestly, because she had no idea yet that the truth would humiliate the two people who brought her there. He told me the marriage was over. He told me you two only stayed together on paper. He told me divorce discussions had already started. That last part surprised even Diane. She hadn't heard that detail before either, because it had never actually happened. Margaret turned to Thomas. Divorce discussions, she repeated. He looked away, and his silence answered for him. Diane tried to recover the moment by attacking the one thing she always attacked. She said Margaret treated marriage like a business arrangement, that a man needs affection, that Margaret had spent years more devoted to contracts than to her husband. Margaret considered it, then said one word. Interesting. Diane frowned. That's your response? Margaret asked her a question back. Do you think the biggest issue in this marriage is that I work? Diane said, isn't it? Margaret said no, and let the silence after that answer speak for itself. Then she sat back down and let the dinner limp forward into forced small talk. She had learned enough for one night, and people reveal far more when they believe they've already won. Weeks later, Thomas finally brought up divorce directly. In the kitchen, on an ordinary Thursday evening, Margaret poured her tea and listened. He said they should separate. She said all right. He looked stunned that she didn't fight it, didn't cry, didn't ask him to reconsider. Would it change anything if I did? She asked. He said no. Then there's nothing to discuss, she said. He mentioned lawyers. She said she'd already spoken to one. He mentioned there would be asset discussions, and that's when she set her cup down and smiled the same small smile from the dinner, the one that made people uneasy without knowing why. What assets? She asked. He blinked and said their assets. She looked at him for a long moment and said, Thomas, before you start counting money, make sure you know who owns it. He didn't understand the warning yet. He would very soon. 2 days after the kitchen conversation, Margaret sat across from Gabriel Reyes, the attorney who had represented her grandfather, then the company, then her personally for the better part of 15 years. He'd watched the marriage from a careful distance the way lawyers learn to, never commenting until asked. How are you holding up? He asked. Fine, she said. Better than fine, honestly. He raised an eyebrow but didn't push. There's been an inquiry, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Someone representing Thomas requested information on the ownership structure of the house and the company. Margaret read the request twice, unbothered. That was faster than I expected, she said. Do you want me to respond? Gabriel asked. Not yet, she said. Let him find out the way everyone eventually does, through the paperwork, not through me. Gabriel had worked with her long enough to recognize the difference between someone plotting revenge and someone simply refusing to soften a truth that was never hers to soften in the first place. This isn't about punishing him, she said, almost to herself. It's about finally being finished pretending the last few years were something they weren't. A week later, Thomas sat across from his attorney reviewing paperwork for the settlement. The attorney asked what he expected to walk away with. Thomas said half the house, half the company, the usual split. The attorney went quiet, then opened a folder. The title isn't in your name, he said. Only hers. Thomas laughed it off and said fine. Then the business. More silence. The company belongs to Margaret too, the attorney said. Fully. It had been left to her by her grandfather. structured as a private inheritance years before the marriage even began. Thomas drove straight to his mother's house that night. Diane opened the door smiling until she saw his face. "The house is hers," he said. "All of it. The company too." Diane sat down slowly, trying to force reality back into the shape she'd already decided on. "There must still be money somewhere," she said. Thomas didn't answer, and the silence was the only answer she needed. At mediation, the documents did all the talking. Property records, ownership structures, trust paperwork, business registrations, every single page confirming the same fact. The primary assets belonged to Margaret, fully and directly, not shared, not joint, not partial. The mediator called it straightforward. For Thomas, the word felt like a verdict. His attorney tried once, carefully, to raise the question of contribution, arguing Thomas had helped maintain the property and support the business informally over the years. Gabriel didn't even raise his voice. "Supporting something and owning something are two different legal categories," he said, and the mediator agreed without hesitation. Thomas sat through the rest of the session mostly in silence, watching a decade of assumptions get dismantled one document at a time. When the session ended and everyone gathered their things, he stayed seated and finally asked her, "Why didn't you tell me?" She stopped at the door and looked back at him. "Tell you what, that everything was mine? You never asked," she said. "You assumed, your mother assumed, Lauren assumed. I simply let you enjoy something you never bothered to understand." He asked why she never corrected any of it sooner. Her answer was quiet, and it cost her more than she let show. "Because I thought you'd married me, not what I owned." Nobody in the room had a response to that because there wasn't one to give. Thomas moved into a modest apartment, living for the first time in years entirely within his own means. Diane found that most relatives quietly kept their distance, not because of the affair and not because of the divorce, but because of how loudly she had celebrated a downfall that hadn't actually happened yet. Lauren learned the full truth from the documents themselves, not from Thomas. She confronted him once in a coffee shop, asked why he lied about the marriage being over, about the divorce already being underway. He had no real answer. She stood, said, "That's what I thought," and never came back. Margaret's life became quieter, which was exactly what she wanted. The company grew. New contracts came in. Her success continued not because of revenge, but because she was simply good at what she did. People often confused the two. About a year later, she ran into Lauren at a business conference. Neither carried resentment into that conversation. Lauren apologized. Margaret told her, "At some point we all make decisions using the information we're given." It was the closest thing either of them got to closure, and it was enough. Closing reflection. People still talk about that dinner, about the family who tried to replace a wife inside a house they didn't understand they were borrowing. What they remember most isn't the affair or the divorce. It's how calm she stayed while everyone else lost their composure. Confidence was never about proving her worth to people who had already decided not to see it. It was about never needing to. Money can be lost and rebuilt. Titles can be transferred and revoked. But the quiet certainty of knowing exactly who you are, without needing anyone else to confirm it, is the one thing nobody in that story ever managed to take from her. If someone ever tried to replace you in your own life, tell us how you'd handle it in the comments below.